Hey guys, tonight we trudge straight into the frostbitten, soot-stained misery that was a medieval winter. Imagine waking up on a straw mattress so frozen it crunches when you shift. Your breath fogs the air above your face, and the thatched roof is glistening with ice from your own exhalations. Your fingers are too stiff to pull on your woolen tunic, which, by the way, smells like a sheep and feels like sandpaper. If you're lucky, you're not sharing this bed with fleas, lice, or a surprisingly bold mouse who's claimed the warmer half of the pillow. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there, because whether it's midnight in Montreal or nap o'clock in New Zealand, you're welcome here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You roll out of bed slowly, cautiously. Your feet slap down on cold earth. No flooring, no rugs. Just hard-packed dirt that's been walked on by your ancestors for a couple of 100 years and occasionally by your chickens. If the door latch is loose, the thatch overhead has frosted during the night, and now little icy drips land on your head like unwanted blessings. You reach for your cloak if you have one. It's scratchy, too short, and possibly woven by someone who'd never seen a human body. Still, it's better than nothing. Everything in your home smells faintly of smoke, dampness, and the kind of sour humanity that lingers when no one's bathed since All Saints' Day. The fireplace, a smudged hole in the wall with rocks around it, isn't so much a source of warmth as a place where heat once lived. If someone was smart enough to keep embers banked under ash, you can coax the fire back into something resembling life. If not, well, it's a long and smoky wait with half-burnt twigs. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants mastered efficient hearth management or simply hoped for divine intervention when it came to not freezing to death. You stare at the pit and wonder if today will be a smoke in your eyes, or a smoke in your lungs kind of morning. Even your breath feels sullen. You push open the wooden door, it creaks like it's telling you not to bother and step out into the bite of winter. No snow today, which is a relief. But frost coats the bare trees, and your water bucket is sealed with the lid of stubborn ice. You try to crack it with the butt of a spoon. It resists. You try again. The spoon loses. Life in a medieval winter is less about living and more about negotiating terms with the cold, and the cold it doesn't negotiate. You glance down the lane. Smoke drifts from a few neighbouring homes, though it's more suggestion than certainty. You hear a cough echo out a deep, wet kind of sound that might belong to old Tom, or the pig he let sleep in the kitchen. Hard to tell. Your stomach growls, and you remember that you have one crust of bread left. Maybe. If the mice didn't get it first. You trudge back inside, kick the door closed gently so it doesn't fall off, and eye the table where your meagre stores sit like grumpy relics. The bread is, in fact, still there. It's just harder now than your landlord's heart. You try to gnaw a piece off the edge. It splinters like soft wood. You're too hungry to care, though, so you dunk it in a mug of leftover ale. It doesn't help. Nothing helps. The entire house is a winter museum, one exhibit called Sad Cold Shoes, another called Pants You Can't Take Off or You'll Die. Somewhere, a candle refuses to light. Somewhere else, a dog whines in its sleep, chasing dreams of July. You sit by the hearth, cup your hands around the slow blossoming flame, and sigh. Another day begins, and winter shows no sign of letting go. You stay by the hearth longer than necessary, hands stretch toward the shy little flame that finally caught after 3 attempts. 2 splinters and a whispered threat. It doesn't roar, it whimpers, but that's fine. At this point, even a warm whimper feels like a miracle. Your feet still wrapped in wool strips that used to be part of a tunic. No one mourned are slowly thawing. You wiggle your toes. They respond, but only out of pity. The air inside the cottage is thick with smoke. You're not choking exactly, just simmering in it. Since chimneys aren't standard in your little home and probably won't be for another couple of centuries, the smoke slithers out through gaps in the thatch or lingers near the ceiling like a grumpy ghost. It curls into your eyes, settles in your clothes, and permanently flavours your life like a poorly chosen spice. You glance up at the hole in the roof, the one you patched with moss last September. It's leaking again. Not water, thankfully. Just cold. A kind of creeping, opinionated cold that makes you consider setting the roof on fire just to see what happens. Historians still argue whether medieval homes were deliberately designed to be this uncooperative, or if builders just gave up halfway through every project and called it a day. The fire crackles. You coax a few more sparks out of the damp wood and debate your next move. Breakfast, fetch water. Pretend you're dead until spring. Your stomach rumbles. Loudly. You decide to investigate your food situation, which, spoiler alert, is just sad. The pantry is less a pantry, and more a glorified wooden box nailed to the wall. You open it and peer inside. A turnip, 3 onions, one with a face, and a small cloth bag of what might be dried peas or very old bugs. You poke the bag. It doesn't move. You decide it's food. You slice off a bit of turnip. It squeaks against the knife. You eat it raw. It tastes like regret. Still chewing, you shuffle to the bucket near the door. Water, or what used to be water, now it's ice. You chip at it with a spoon, then a ladle, then just your soul. Eventually, you manage a few slivers enough to melt in a pot over the fire. You drop them in, and they sizzle like they disapprove of being disturbed. Once the water warms, you toss in the onions and the sad bits of root. The stew, if you can call it that, bubbles in an accusatory way. A proper medieval breakfast, made with love and the occasional mouse hair. You sip it slowly, each mouthful tasting like defeat softened by warmth. Outside, the wind howls. You pull your cloak tighter and glance at the door. It's warped, splintered, and hanging on by one hinge, but it's your first line of defence against the frozen world beyond. That, and the hope that snowdrifts will pile high enough to block the wolves. Because yes, there are wolves, and sometimes they get bold. You remember old Tom's story from last year about the wolf that wandered into the village and made off with 2 chickens and a sock? No one's sure if the sock was his, but it certainly wasn't the wolf's. You finish your stew. Somehow, the fire is already fading. Wood is precious this time of year. You ration it carefully, 1 log now, 1 at sundown, and maybe a few twigs to get through the night. You dream of the forest, of trees standing proud and smug in their bark. But the forest is 3 miles away, and your axe snapped last week. You'll barter for a new one if the roads thaw before your boots fall apart. Big if. You set the bowl down, wrap your cloak around yourself like a tortilla of suffering, and stand. Your joints click and pop like a poorly made marionette, and that's when you see it your breath, still clouding the air indoors. The fire sighs. You sigh harder. This is going to be a long winter. You shuffle to the bench near the door, if you can even call it a bench. It's just a warped plank balanced on two stumps, one of which leans at an angle that seems deeply offended by physics. You sit anyway, not because it's comfortable, but because standing requires energy, and energy is a spring thing. Your cloak wool, loosely woven, dyed in the vague shade of formerly brown, hangs heavy on your shoulders. It smells faintly of smoke, cabbage, and a hint of wet dog, though you haven't owned a dog in 3 winters. You rub your hands together. The friction is symbolic. Outside, the sun has technically risen, though you wouldn't know it from the sullen grey smudge barely visible through the frost-glazed window. There's that kind of medieval winter morning where time forgets to pass and even the birds don't bother trying to sing. You've got layers on, sure, 2 shirts, a vest, a tunic, and your cloak, but every single one of them is made of materials that whisper. We were never meant to keep anyone warm, and yet you must venture out, to feed the goat or check the traps, or simply to prove to the world that you're still kicking. You brace yourself. Deep breath. Open the door. The cold hits your face like a disapproving slap from a bishop. You step out onto the frozen ground. The mud has solidified into something that could probably be used to make swords. Your breath fogs in front of you, thick and reluctant. Somewhere in the distance a rooster crows or tries to. It comes out more like a gargle of existential despair. Historians still argue whether roosters in winter suffered from seasonal depression or were just dramatically overworked. You pass the neighbour's cottage, just a squat pile of wood and hope with smoke barely drifting from the roof. A child peeks out from a gap in the boards, face smeared with soot, eyes huge. You give them a nod. They don't nod back, but they blink slowly, which is probably as close to a greeting as they can manage in this weather. Your boots crunch across the frost. You slip, recover, pretend it didn't happen. You reach the pen where your goat, Agnes, is chewing aggressively on the same patch of fence she's been working on since Michaelmas. She's got frost on her horns and a look in her eye that says, "Don't start with me." You respect it. You toss her a handful of hay-old, wiry stuff that smells like attic. She munches anyway. She's resilient. This one, unlike the last goat, you don't talk about the last goat. You trudge back toward the house. Your fingers are numb despite being tucked in your sleeves, and you're pretty sure one toe just stopped checking in. You'll count them later. Back inside, the house greets you with the warm embrace of a chilly tomb. The fire has collapsed into sulking embers. You feed it another log and whisper encouragement. It responds with a smoke puff and what might have been a hiss. You sit by the fire again, clutching your knees, trying to remember what it feels like to not shiver. Outside, the wind picks up. It rattles the shutters. One bangs open. You sigh, stand again, close this with a grunt, and shove a rag into the frame to keep it shut. Medieval home security at its finest. You sit again, and then you wait, because that's what winter is now, a long stretch of waiting. Waiting for the stew to boil, waiting for your toes to thaw, waiting for the world to soften around the edges again, and maybe, just maybe, waiting for spring to remember you're here. You don't so much eat in winter as survive food. There's no abundance, no excitement, no what's for dinner debates. There's just the stuff that hasn't spoiled yet, and even that's a stretch. Your meals have the same emotional palette as the landscape outside, grey, lumpy, and resigned. You shuffle to the shelf that holds your remaining stores, a few turnips, a bruised apple that looks like it gave up weeks ago, A lump of dried cheese that doubles as a pest deterrent. It squeaks when you cut it, but you convince yourself that's a good sign. You drop everything into the pot over the fire and stir. The resulting meal is technically edible, assuming you don't mind crunching a little bark from last night's firewood. You slurp it slowly, chewing each bite like it might be your last. Not because you're dramatic, but because chewing is a survival tactic in this climate if nothing else. It keeps your jaw moving and your face from freezing. Historians still argue whether peasants developed jaw strength purely through winter eating, or as a side effect of constantly gnashing their teeth in frustration. You wipe your mouth with your sleeve and set the bowl aside, and now comes the hard part. No, not the hunger, the boredom. Winter in a medieval village is like living in a snow globe someone shook and then forgot about. You can't farm, you can't wash anything unless you want frostbite, and you definitely can't walk to the next village unless you enjoy slipping on frozen mud while carrying your own coffin. So you stay in and wait. The silence is a character in itself. Thick, itchy, judgmental. It presses down on your shoulders as you sit by the hearth, legs curled under you like a cat with arthritis. You try whittling a stick. You've already got 6 identical pointy sticks. But hey, stick 7 might be the one. You hear a knock on the door, more like a tap. You freeze. Then remember, it's probably just old Nan checking if your turnips are mouldier than hers. You answer. She's bundled in what appears to be every blanket she owns, and her nose is so red it looks like a lantern in a snowstorm. She doesn't speak, just hands you a small cloth pouch, inside salt, a pinch, maybe 2. You nearly cry. Salt in winter is like gold that forgot it was supposed to be precious. You nod your thanks. She grunts, then disappears into the haze of smoke and frost. You sprinkle the salt on your next bite of root stew and nearly fall over from the flavour. It's barely a difference, but in this world, barely is everything. Later, you take inventory. 1 log left for the fire, 3 usable spoons, 5 cracked bowls, 1 warm memory from last summer involving a field of flowers and no shoes. You cling to that memory like it's a hot brick from the fire. Outside, the sun disappears at what feels like noon. The cottage grows darker. You light a tallow candle. It flickers and drips, casting slow shadows on the walls. The smoke tickles your nose. You sneeze, which is the most dramatic thing that's happened all day. You lie down on your straw mattress. It pokes you in 17 different places, but at least it doesn't talk back. You pull the wool blanket over your head, leaving only your nose exposed, which, by the way, is still cold. You close your eyes and listen to the wind, to the silence, to the sound of your stomach reminding you that tomorrow's meal might be thinner than today's. You don't answer, because winter in the Middle Ages doesn't care what you want. It only asks one thing: will you last until thaw? The next morning doesn't arrive so much as slump into existence. You wake up groggy, unsure if it's still night. The light coming through the shutter cracks is milky and slow, like someone diluted daylight with a bucket of sadness. You sniff. The fire's out. Of course it is. Your breath fogs in the air as you sit up. The blanket has migrated halfway across the room during the night. You pull it back over your shoulders, dragging it like a cape of mediocrity. Your nose, faithful as ever, is ice cold. You give it a few encouraging taps. It refuses to respond. Standing feels like a betrayal of your limbs. Every joint argues. Your knees crack like distant thunder. You whisper apologies and promises of warm broth. They don't believe you. The house is still. Too still. You poke the fire pit. Ash and judgment. No coals. No glow. Just a void of responsibility. Which means you guessed it. It's ember charming time. You fumble through the kindling basket. A few sticks. One damp pine cone. And a mouse nest that looks suspiciously recent. You remove the tenants. Gently. They squeak their outrage and vanish behind the wall. You strike flint against steel. Once, twice, 20 times. Eventually, as sparks flirt with the straw and something catches. You might cry, but the air is too dry. While the fire wakes up, you shuffle over to the corner where you keep your clothes. By which we mean the cleaner pile of the two. You layer up shirt, tunic, cloak, bonus scarf made from something that was once someone's curtain. Historians still argue whether layering was more practical or psychological. After all, if you wear 6 layers, it becomes harder to tell if you're shivering or just impersonating a cabbage. You pour a cup of weak ale. It's your morning drink. Not for fun, but because water, in its current crunchy form, is too much work. And even if you do melt some ice, there's no guarantee it won't make you sick. Fun fact, medieval water systems often had more bacteria than a toddler's toy bin. So yes, cheers to liquid bread. You chew a hunk of bread from yesterday. It's drier now, which seems impossible. You dunk it in the ale. It disintegrates like your optimism. You eat it anyway, outside. The wind whines. You peek through the shutter. Snow again. Not a lot, just enough to hide the dangers. The icy patches, the holes, the goat. You step out anyway, because chores don't care about your personal journey. First stop the well. It's half a mile downhill, which means a full mile total, because your return trip involves carrying 2 sloshing buckets and regretting every choice that led you to this moment. The path is crunchy, slick, and sprinkled with goat prints. You follow them, hoping Agnes hasn't joined a travelling wolf pack out of spite. You reach the well. The rope is stiff, the bucket frozen. You knock the ice loose, lower it slowly, and hear the blessed splash below. You draw it up, heavy, precious. A medieval gym workout that doesn't even give you abs, just calluses and resentment. You trudge back. The wind cuts through your cloak. Your eyes water. A sneeze builds. You hold it. Because sneezing on this path means dropping a bucket or slipping on frozen chicken poop. You survive. Back at home, you set the water by the fire, hoping it doesn't immediately refreeze out of pettiness. You strip off the outermost layer, steaming now from exertion, and flop onto the bench. You've only been awake an hour, and already you're negotiating with the gods for an early bedtime. Welcome to medieval winter. It's not even lunchtime. You sit by the fire again, because what else is there to do? The embers have finally decided to cooperate, offering just enough warmth to keep your extremities on speaking terms. You extend your hands, palms open, like you're praying to the god of slightly less cold. The cottage smells faintly of smoke, stale broth, and damp wool. Not terrible, not pleasant, just familiar. The walls creak softly as the cold expands and contracts the wood. It's like the house is shivering too. You look around. There's the shelf with your bowls, stacked unevenly. The hook where your one good lantern hangs, crooked. A rat scampers across the floor like it owns the place. You nod at it. It pauses, nods back. That's the level of social engagement you're working with today. You grab your knitting not because you're good at it, but because it keeps your fingers busy and vaguely warmer than doing nothing. You're halfway through what might be a scarf or might be a lopsided hat. Hard to tell, but it's something. Something soft. Something you made. Historians still argue whether textile work was a genuine pastime or just a survival mechanism disguised as creativity. Either way, you loop and pull the wool like it matters. Outside, the sky starts to lighten. Not with sun, of course, just with a slightly less oppressive shade of grey. You peer through a gap in the shutter and see a figure moving along the road, bundled, bent, dragging a sled with something bulky on top. You blink. Is that? Yes, it's the tinker, the one who wanders from village to village, selling scraps and mending pots, his sled full of mystery and occasionally mouldy soap. You haven't seen him since harvest. You scramble up, heart doing a little jig for the first time in days. You throw on your cloak and boots well, boot-shaped sacks, and dash outside. The cold bites your face like it missed you. You wave. The tinker nods, slows his sled, and reaches into a bundle. He holds up a tin cup with only 3 dents in it, and a length of twine that looks strong enough to hang a basket or fix your chicken coop. Maybe both. You trade him an onion, a spoon, and half a song. He hums the rest with you, badly. You both laugh. It's the first time you've heard laughter that wasn't your own nervous giggle in weeks. He leaves you with a wink and a stick of something that might be soap or cheese, or possibly both. You tuck it into your pocket like treasure. Back inside, you rinse the new cup with water you actually earned from the well, remember that, and set it beside the fire like it's made of gold. Which, honestly, it might as well be. You warm your hands again. You sip lukewarm broth from your new cup. You hold it with both hands, close your eyes, and feel content for a moment. Then Agnes bleats, loudly. You forgot to resecure the pen after yesterday's repair attempt. You rush outside in time to see her halfway through your wood pile, chewing on what was supposed to be tonight's fuel. You yell her name like it means something. She stares at you, still chewing. You give up. It's just another medieval winter day. Same cold, same goat, slightly better cup. You're back inside. A little snow in your hair. One glove mysteriously wetter than the other, and a growing suspicion that Agnes is planning something bigger than woodpile sabotage. You stomp your boots, if you can still call them that, at the threshold. A few clumps of ice fall off, revealing layers of old mud, straw, and what might be last summer's regret. The fire is still alive, barely. You nudge it with a poker, and it responds like a grumpy cat low hiss. No eye contact. You toss on a few twigs. It's not much, but it's what you've got. You hang your wet glove by the hearth and sigh. The glove slumps like it's also giving up. You sit again, same spot, same bench, same ache in your hip. It's astonishing how winter turns your bones into musical instruments. Every move is a creak, a crack, a groan. Somewhere, a medieval composer is jealous. To distract yourself from your own sound effects, you dig out your one book. Yes, you own a book. A gift from a wandering monk who once stayed in your cottage during a storm and repaid your lumpy hospitality with a hand-copied volume of parables and farming advice. The ink is fading. The pages are brittle, but it's a link to a world beyond frozen turnips and goat mutiny. You open to a favourite passage about a saint who fasted for 40 days in winter while praying knee-deep in snow. You close the book immediately. Not helpful. Historians still argue whether medieval saints were deeply spiritual or just wildly competitive. You look around for other distractions. A dented pan fixed. The broom already bristled to nubs. The wall crack that looks like a lion. Still a lion. You consider talking to the broom. You don't. Instead, you wander to the small window and press your palm to the glass. It's not glass, exactly more like oily paper stretched across a frame. It lets in a bit of light and a lot of gossip from the wind. Out in the village square, you see movement, a few neighbours scuttling between houses like nervous squirrels. Someone's carrying firewood. Someone else is dragging a sack of what might be potatoes or small children. Judging by the size and limpness, you wave. No one sees. Socialising in winter is like shouting into a sock. Everyone's too bundled up, too cold, too tired. Still, you miss it. You miss long gossip sessions at the well, market days, listening to old Bert argue with his own beard. You even miss Marjorie's cabbage pie complaints, and she really commits to those. You head back to the fire, stoke it again. Listen to the wind scratch at the door like a cat with a grudge. And then, from the edge of your hearing, you catch something else, faint bells, not church bells. These jingle, you smile. Travellers, peddlers, maybe. Sometimes they come through even in winter, wrapped up like walking bundles of wool and bearing ribbons, combs and stories. You pull on your cloak, fasten it tight. You might not buy anything. You might not even leave the house. But knowing someone's out there moving, surviving, jingling is enough to warm your heart for a few minutes anyway. Because soon the snow will get deeper, the wind sharper, and even the peddlers will vanish. But for now, you sip broth from your prized tin cup, sit by the fire, and pretend the world is just a little bit bigger than your cold little room. The wind howls louder that night, slipping through the cracks in the walls and floor like a cat no one invited. You wake before dawn, because in this season, sleep is a series of awkward naps taken between temperature crises. Your feet have slipped out from under the blanket again. You curl tighter, but the straw under your mattress crunches and jabs back like a passive-aggressive note. You grope blindly for your extra shawl. It's not extra. Nothing is. But in winter, you pretend. The fire is dead. Not dormant. Not resting. Dead. You groan and sit up. The ritual begins. Flint, steel, breath, pleading, smoke, sputtering, success. A weak flame comes to life, struggling like a baby bird. You guard it with your whole body, cupping your hands around it until the log catches. There's a deep satisfaction in that moment, primitive, proud. You think, I have defeated the void. Again. Then you cough, because of course the smoke is heading straight for your face. Medieval chimneys, if you have one at all, are more like polite suggestions to the smoke than actual escape routes. Historians still argue whether these chimneys were a design flaw or just architectural sarcasm. You open the shutter a crack to let the smoke out. The cold slaps you in the face like it's reminding you who's boss. You let it. It's breakfast time, which means ale and leftovers. You gnaw on a corner of last night's bread, which is now harder than the cutting board it was resting on. You dunk it in the ale. It resists. You dunk harder. You win. Sort of. It's like chewing on a memory of food. You check your stores. 2 turnips, 1 onion, a sprouting potato that might be trying to grow legs and walk out on you. You whisper threats to it. It sulks. Agnes bleats. You sigh. The pen again. Out you go. The snow has a crust on top this morning, thin, sharp and smug. Every step is a gamble. Will you stay above or plunge through? Your boots are soaked within minutes. You do that funny little dance people do when snow leaks inside but there's nowhere to sit. Agnes stares at you from a corner of the yard, clearly unimpressed. She's standing in your wood pile again. You raise a finger, prepared to deliver a monologue, but she trots off before you can begin. You collect a few sticks of wood from what's left and head back inside, each piece more damp than the last. The cottage greets you with silence, too much silence. You listen, drip, drip. You look up. The ceiling is weeping, not metaphorically, literally. The snow on the roof has started to melt slightly from your fire's heat, and now the thatch is leaking in 6 different places. You grab bowls, buckets, and a boot with a hole in the toe to catch the drips. You stare at them all, then you laugh. Because what else can you do? You sit on the bench, soaked boot beside you, steam curling from your cloak, and you laugh like someone who's just accepted that reality is a long, cold joke with no punchline. The rat comes out again. You raise your tin cup in a toast. To surviving, you say. It blinks. Close enough. Outside. The wind roars. Inside. The fire crackles. And somehow, against all logic and comfort, you feel okay. For now. Later that afternoon, the air thickens. Not with warmth. Don't be ridiculous. But with heaviness. That subtle shift in pressure that tells you snow is on its way. Again, of course. You feel it in your joints first. Your knuckles tighten. Your knees whisper curses from beneath your layers. Then you notice it in the light fainter than usual, tinted grey with a hint of menace. You pull your cloak tighter and light another candle, even though it's barely midday. The flame flickers uncertainly, like it too has opinions about the coming storm. Outside, the village stirs in slow motion. A neighbour trudges past, dragging a sled of firewood that looks stolen or shared, depending on who asks. You nod through the window crack. They don't look up. Everyone's too focused on bracing. You begin your own version of preparation. It's not exactly survivalist, more symbolic. First, you rearrange the wood near the hearth. The pile is pitiful, but stacking it just right gives the illusion of control. Next, you stir the pot over the fire a thin broth, more warm water than flavour. You toss in the lonely onion, giving it a small ceremonial farewell. It plops in with a wet sigh. Then you check the ceiling again, still dripping. You reposition your boot under the worst spot. It accepts the assignment with grim dignity. Historians still argue whether winter rituals like these were driven by tradition or the sheer need to do something that felt helpful. You sit back down and pull your knees to your chest. Your fingers toy with a bit of thread from your tunic, frayed but familiar. A low rumble rolls through the air, distant thunder, or just your imagination dramatising the oncoming flakes. You peek out the door. Snow. Fat, lazy flakes descending like they're late to a boring meeting. At first, they seem innocent, picturesque, even, but you know better. You've seen what happens when snow accumulates and turns the road to soup and the rooftops to traps. You close the door, slowly, with respect, like you're trying not to offend the weather. Inside, the rat has curled up near the hearth. You don't chase it. Frankly, it's earned its spot. You add a bit more kindling and sit again. Still, waiting, your mind wanders. Back to summer, to the market days, when the stalls overflowed with apples and gossip, when old Marjorie swore her goose could predict the weather, when the baker's son threw flour at you and missed mostly. You smile, a little, just enough to feel it in your cheeks. Then a knock, not on your door, farther away. Faint, you rise, pull your cloak close. Another knock. You open the shutter and see a small figure at the far edge of the square. A child, no too slow, elderly. Possibly, they're hunched and carrying a basket, trudging toward the chapel. You watch for a moment, then close the shutter. Let them have their reasons. You return to your seat, pour a little ale, sip, and that's when you realize it's gotten quiet. The snow has blanketed every surface, every sound, every concern. Even the rat is still. You wrap the shawl tighter around your shoulders, close your eyes, and breathe. Because sometimes, in a medieval winter, peace arrives not in warmth or plenty, but in the hush of a storm you expected and a stillness you didn't. The snow keeps falling, soft and insistent, like a lullaby you can't stop humming. It thickens on the windowsill, seals the door's edges with icy lace, and swallows every distant sound like it's erasing the world outside your cottage, one flake at a time. Inside, the fire glows low and red, a sleepy eye in the dark, blinking slower with each passing hour. You sit, wrapped in layers, hat tilted to one side like you're fashionably freezing. Your shawl has slipped off one shoulder, but you can't quite be bothered to fix it. The weight of stillness presses down. It's not oppressive, just heavy enough to keep you from moving unless you absolutely must. You watch the snow through the shutter crack. It is mesmerizing. Your thoughts drift, meandering like smoke. You remember a tale your mother told, long ago, about a woman who knitted storms into her sleeves and could unravel them with a snap of her fingers. You used to pretend you had that power. Right now, you wish you did. Because you'd undo this storm with one yank, and maybe stitch together a breeze from spring while you were at it. Historians still argue whether medieval weather superstitions were rooted in ancient paganism or just creative boredom. Either way, you're pretty sure the sky doesn't care what anyone believes. You hear a creak from the roof. Pause. Another. You look up. The snow's weight has begun to press down on the thatch. Not dangerous, not yet, but worrying in the way a headache is worrying when you're out of herbs. You grab a stick, prod the ceiling gently from inside, sending a puff of dust and one startled spider onto your shoulder. You apologize. The spider doesn't answer. After you evict the tiny stowaway kindly with a bit of cloth, you step outside to inspect the roof from below. The cold wraps around you like a wet blanket made of spite. You scan the snow line along the roof's edge. Too much. You grab a broom and start sweeping at the base, trying to knock off what you can. Every few minutes, a sheet of powder collapses down with a whoosh, covering you from knees to boots. A neighbour waves from across the lane, mid-sweep himself. He gestures toward the sky and makes a face that means, this again. You return the face. It's the only universal language in winter. After the third broomful, your arms are numb. You retreat inside, stomp your feet, shake off the snow, and light another candle. This one smells faintly of sheep. It's the best one. The rat pokes its head out again. You toss it a crumb from your barely edible loaf. It accepts. Congratulations, you have a roommate now. You settle back into your corner, tug your shawl up, and sigh deeply. The air inside the cottage smells of damp wool, melting snow, and your breath. Familiar, if not pleasant. Time passes. You check the pot. Still simmering, still sad, but warm. You spoon some out, sip it slowly, and pretend it has seasoning. Your imagination adds time. Your tongue adds disappointment. As the evening rolls in, the light turns blue, not metaphorically, literally. that odd silvery blue tone that snow reflects just before darkness. It fills the room with a strange glow, like moonlight filtered through sorrow. You light your last candle, set it beside the tin cup, and there you are again, cloaked, blanketed, listening to the wind, watching the snow, sipping broth. In another life, you think, maybe you would have been a scribe, or a healer, or a travelling musician who played for warmth and roasted chestnuts. But in this life, you're a peasant with cold toes, an ambitious rat, and a cottage full of creaks. And for tonight, that's enough. You sleep for a bit, not a full sleep, but that winter kind, shallow and soft, where dreams creep in around the edges like frost on the window. You dream you're somewhere warm, not a beach, not a palace. Just a place with walls that don't leak wind and floors that don't bite your soles. You wake to the sound of water dripping. No surprise. But then there's something else. Crunch. You freeze. Another step. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. Not snow falling. Footsteps. Outside. You rise slowly. Creep to the window. Your breath fogs the pane, and you wipe a circle clean with your sleeve. The wool scrapes like a whisper. At first, you see nothing. Then a figure, hooded, heavy boots, a pack slung over their back. They move slowly through the street, leaving deep marks in the snow. Not a villager. You know your villagers by shape and shuffle. This one is new, and then you spotted a stick in their hand, hung with tiny bells, a storyteller, or maybe a mendicant priest. Hard to tell in this light. You pull the shutter closed and light the fire again, just in case they stop in. It's an old rule in the village: if someone's carrying stories or scriptures, you feed them. Even if it's just broth and your last onion. Historians still argue whether this custom was hospitality or superstition. Most likely both. You wait, heart beating slightly faster, not from fear, but from hope. Visitors mean change. Change means stories. Stories mean warmth. There's a knock. You open the door, let them in. The figure pulls back their hood, a woman, face weathered by wind and wisdom, eyes sharp as a sewing needle. "May I sit?" she asks. You nod and gesture toward the fire. She sits. You pass her your tin cup. She takes a slow sip and smiles. "I've come from the coast," she says, "but not for fish." She taps the side of her pack. You hear a soft clink. Bells. Bones, books. She begins to speak. Her voice is low, calm, and carries that strange rhythm of someone used to talking over wind. Wolves and skepticism. She tells a tale of a town where the snow never settled, where people built bridges of moonlight and danced through frost as if it were fog. You don't ask whether it's true. That's not the point. The point is that her words fill the room. Each sentence crackles like firewood. Each pause deeper than your well. The rat even comes out to listen. You nod, murmuring once or twice. Not to interrupt, but to say I'm here. I'm still listening. She ends with a song, soft, ancient. Words you don't know, melody you somehow do. Your eyes sting, though not from smoke. You offer her a corner of the bench. She sleeps, curled like a cat, hands wrapped around her pack. You stay awake, watching the last of the snow fall outside. And you think maybe winter isn't just a season. Maybe it's a test. One you pass not by strength, but by staying still long enough to let strangers in. By morning, the stranger is gone. You wake to find the bench empty, the fire low, and the snow a little higher against your door. But something's different. Warmer. Somehow not the air, Not the light, but the feel of things. You shuffle over to the hearth and see it a tiny wrapped bundle near the ashes. Inside, folded cloth, a small packet of dried herbs, and a note. Not a written one, just a scrap of fabric tied with a strand of twine in the shape of a spiral. A sign from the Travelling Storytellers Guild. If such a guild exists, you've never seen one, but that doesn't stop people from believing in it. You breathe deep. The herb smell of fennel and rosemary luxuries beyond reach last week, and suddenly, yours today. You place them on the shelf with something close to reverence. Outside, the village has changed, not visibly. The snow's still here. The wind still shivers down the chimneys like an uninvited ghost. But people are moving more. You see old Bert chopping wood with what appears to be determination. Marjorie's bundled tighter than a smoked herring. She's trudging to the well with her gossip already half loaded in her glare. Children are throwing snow, occasionally at each other, mostly at goats. Winter's still here. But so are the people, and that matters. You grab your own bucket. It's not your turn for water, but you go anyway, for the walk, for the sound of feet crunching fresh powder, for the chance someone might talk to you. The sky is heavy and pale, a sagging ceiling waiting for another collapse. You glance up. No icicles today, just frost edging everything like sugar on a bitter pastry. The path to the well is narrow, carved by repetition. You step carefully, one foot in front of the other, arms out for balance like a very cold tightrope walker. At the well, two others already wait. Bert and a teen you only vaguely recognise from behind a stack of turnips last fall. Bert grunts. You grunt back. That's the whole conversation. Beautiful. The bucket drops with a splash, echoing in the depth like a memory. When you pull it up, the water's so cold it almost steams. You fill your jug and begin the journey home, heart a little lighter than yesterday. On the way back, you pass the chapel. Its wooden door is ajar just slightly. Inside, a candle flickers. The priest must be up already, mumbling morning prayers through a blanket. You nod toward the open frame, a mutual understanding between cold souls. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers were deeply religious or just liked having somewhere slightly warmer to stand. Back in your cottage, the rat greets you from atop your broom. You nod. You're roommates now. You pour a bit of the new water into the pot and add a pinch of the stranger's herbs. The scent rises immediately, cutting through the winter air like a song. The fire hisses in approval. You sip. It's not much, but it's different. And in the sameness of medieval winter, different is almost divine. You pull your blanket tighter, glance out the window, and see the marks in the snow where the stranger walked away. Long strides, purposeful, gone, but not quite. Not from the room, not from your story. You smile, take another sip, and let the morning begin. The days pass, blurred into sameness by snow and soot, and the slow ticking of a sun that seems more ceremonial than functional. You've stopped counting time by bells or light and started measuring it in chores before firewood, after rat appearance. Third hot stone nap. Still, today has a mood, a shiver in the air, not from cold but from expectation, like something's coming. Not weather, not people, just something. You ignore it, as one does. Instead, you tackle the most ambitious task a medieval peasant can attempt on a winter morning laundry. Yes, it's madness. But your tunic smells like damp goat and sleep, and your undergarments have begun to develop their own personalities. Something must be done. You drag your linen bundle to the edge of the stream behind your cottage well, what used to be a stream. It's now a narrow ribbon of water beneath a crust of ice, gurgling complaints as you crack it open with the back of your ladle. The cold hits like betrayal. Your fingers go stiff before the first rinse, and by the second, you're questioning every life choice that led to this moment. You scrub anyway, because even in winter, there is vanity. And also because your neighbour Judith made a face the last time she stood near you at chapel. The cloth stiffens before it dries, freezing into accidental origami on the line. You leave it. Nature will decide whether you get a wearable result or a new window covering. Back inside, you thaw your hands over the fire. They tingle angrily, like cats returning from a vet visit. The rat watches, amused. You notice something strange. The corner of your cottage smells different. Not bad. Not mould. Something sweet. You follow your nose to the wall and realise a gap in the door has opened slightly. You press your eye to it. A beehive. Buried under the thatch eave, hidden from wind and owl alike, just humming faintly behind the wall. You grin. In a world where most surprises are unpleasant frozen socks, exploding turnips, unexpected in-laws, this is pure treasure. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers intentionally built near wild hives or just got very lucky. You vote luck. You sit beside the wall, cup in hand, listening to the low buzz so faint it could be imagined. It calms you more than the fire, more than the broth. You whisper, stay alive, little bees, because if they do, come spring, you might have honey, and that's not just food that's medicine. Trade, joy, luxury by the spoonful. You pull your blanket tighter and daydream of sticky fingers and golden toast. A fantasy, of course, but a delicious one. Outside. The wind sighs. Not a groan this time, just a sigh, like it's resting too. You watch your frozen laundry flap weakly in the breeze and laugh. It sounds like creaking wood and something close to hope, because even in a winter where days crawl, rats judge and bees sleep behind your wall, there are still small sweetnesses, and you're learning to notice them. The next morning starts with silence, the kind that feels padded. Snow has covered the earth again, a fresh blanket over the old, smoothing out footprints, worries, and even yesterday's complaints. It's a painter's canvas out there, soft, white, and just begging to be ruined by your boots. You rise slowly. Your limbs ache, but not in a bad way. In a you didn't freeze to death last night kind of way. Progress. You tend the fire, grateful for the embers still alive. One spark and it flares up, like a compliment taken a little too seriously. You warm your hands and notice that your skin is cracking again. The cold does that. It steals the moisture, the softness, the youth from your hands, leaving them papery and noble, like bark on an old tree. You wrap a cloth around your worst knuckle and pretend it's battle damage. Outside, a curious thing happens. A raven lands on your roof. Now, normally, that's not strange. Ravens are common, but this one sits at an angle, stares directly into your window, and caws once. Then again. You stare back. The rat perks up too. You both inch closer, unsure whether this is an omen or just a particularly dramatic bird. It flaps down to the path, pecks at a bit of snow, and then flies off toward the woods. You shiver, but not from cold. Ravens have meaning, always have. Messengers, tricksters, protectors, or just hungry birds. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly believed animals carried prophecies or simply enjoyed the drama of it. You decide it was probably delivering a memo weather status still awful. After a very short breakfast, 1 bite of dried apple, 2 gulps of thin ale and an imaginary feast, you bundle up and head out to check your traps. Yes, you trap, because sometimes the stew needs more than onions. And occasionally, the world gives you a rabbit. The forest path is narrow but familiar, winding past frostbitten hedges and one very sarcastic stump that always catches your cloak. You scowl at it on the way by. The first trap is empty, the second sprung, but nothing inside. The third holds a small blessing, a fat squirrel, already frozen. You whisper a thank you, not to anyone in particular, just to the moment, maybe to the squirrel. Who knows? You tuck it into your pouch and trudge home, the trees creaking above you like old bones retelling stories. As you near your cottage, you notice fresh footprints near your door, booted, narrow, not yours. The snow tells everything. You pause, then push the door open slowly. No one inside, but something is different. Your broom is leaning against the other wall, and on your bench a small cloth parcel, tied neatly with red thread. You open it. Inside 3 dried figs, 1 small wedge of cheese, and a note scratched on bark trade for stories. Same time tomorrow. You smile. It's not just a gift, it's a proposal. In medieval winter, there are 2 currencies, warmth and words, and today you've earned both. The sun doesn't rise so much as it yawns a pale streak across the snow-drenched sky, more suggestion than substance. You sit cross-legged by the hearth, the red-threaded bark note propped beside you like a reminder that, yes, something did happen yesterday that wasn't just more potatoes. You spend the morning wondering which story to trade. You don't have scrolls or books, nothing that smells like knowledge, but your head is full of things. Whispers from your grandmother, tales muttered behind ale mugs, things overheard while pretending to sleep. You choose one, a good one with wolves and bells and a mysterious woman who may or may not be the wind in disguise. You say it aloud, once, to the rat. It squeaks in approval. You boil a bit of squirrel with onion and a pinch of the stranger's herb, then save the rest for the evening. This smell fills the room, and for a brief moment, your cottage smells like a tavern minus the shouting. Then it's time. You bundle up in every layer you own, including that cloak with the hole under the arm that you keep pretending isn't there. The snow is deeper now, and walking feels like wading through a very crunchy pudding. You trudge to the edge of the village, where the woods begin. You find the hollow log where the parcel was left yesterday, empty, but warm, still holding heat. So you sit and you wait. The silence is different here. Not empty, just full of things you can't hear. Then, movement. From between the trees comes a figure short, cloaked, face half hidden. You can't tell their age, their gender, or their intent, but their steps are slow, purposeful. They stop a few feet from you and tilt their head. You nod. They gesture to the log. You sit again. They sit too. The snow creaks under them like a secret unfolding. You reach into your satchel, pull out the story not on paper, not in ink, just your voice, quiet, slow, carried like soup across cold air. You tell it. The tale of the wolf woman who could call winter with a whistle, and the village boy who learned her song. How he saved his town with a whisper and a bell made of ice. How he melted away before spring, leaving only footprints that never thawed. The stranger listens without moving. When you finish, they place something in your hand. A rock, no, a fossil, a tiny seashell turned to stone. You blink. They nod. Trade complete. They rise and walk away. You remain for a while, holding the shell, listening to the snow breathe. Historians still argue whether shell fossils found in mountain villages were traded from the coasts or unearthed by accident. Either way, to you, it feels like magic. You return home. The rat is waiting. You place the fossil on your shelf, beside the dry herbs and the wax dripping shaped like a duck. Then you sit by the fire and tell the story again. Softer this time. Just for you. That night, you sleep deeper than usual. Not because it's warmer, it isn't, but because something inside you has softened. Like the part of your mind that usually bristles against silence has decided to rest its eyes for a while. You dream of the sea, not a real sea, but one made of snow. And there are shells, tiny, fossilized whispering stories that sound like your own voice but older. You wake with your face pressed into your sleeve and the rat curled under your blanket like it pays rent. The shell sits on the shelf where you left it, still real, still improbable. Outside, the snow has crusted over. A fine layer of ice atop the fluff, just enough to trick you into thinking it's solid before you crash through it up to your knees. You do this several times while fetching wood. Each time, you mutter a curse that's entirely era-appropriate and mostly invented. You light the fire with more care than usual, add extra kindling, feed it slowly, like an apology, because today you need warmth, not just for your skin, but for your words. Because today you'll tell another story. You don't know if the cloaked figure will return. Maybe the trade was a one-time thing. Maybe it was a test, or a ritual, or just someone else bored enough to barter fantasy for fossil. Still, you prepare. You boil some water, steep the last of your dried root. Its bitter and earthy taste like the memory of vegetables. You watch the steam rise and practice your tale. This one's older. A fable passed down from someone whose name you never caught, but who always smelled faintly of ash and honey. It's about a child who followed a snowflake into the forest and never came back. But the village changed, not the child. That's the twist. No one remembers what, exactly, shifted. But nothing was ever quite the same again. Historians still argue whether such stories were metaphors for plague, famine, or just warnings against bad parenting. You prefer the mystery. You wrap up and step into the cold. This time, you know the way. Past the chapel, past Judith's suspicious laundry line, out to the woods. The log is empty again, but a sprig of dried lavender has been placed atop it. You smile, you sit, and you wait. When the figure arrives, they bring no parcel, just presents. They sit, and you begin. This tale is longer, stranger. It twists in on itself like the roots of a frostbitten tree. You speak slower, not for effect, but because each word feels heavy, anchored with memory. The figure listens. Halfway through, you see them shift, just slightly, a lean in, a nod. When you finish, they hand you something wrapped in cloth. You open it as they vanish into the woods, swift as breath, inside a comb, not wood, not bone, glass. A green-tinted, wave-shaped thing with a broken tooth and a shimmer like sea foam. Impossible, valuable, useless, beautiful. You clutch it, return home, place it on the shelf, beside the fossil, beside the herbs. And as the snow sighs against your windowsill, you realise your shelf is turning into a museum, one not of objects, but of belief. The next few days are quieter, not empty, just stretched thin, like the sound of wind between rafters. You don't see the figure again. No new parcels appear on the log. The lavender turns brittle and breaks apart in the breeze. The glass comb gathers soot from the fire and glows dully in the low light. Still, you keep going. 'Cause that's winter. It doesn't reward consistency, but it requires it. You carry water, you break ice, you boil the same 3 ingredients and convince yourself each version is subtly different. You hum stories to yourself, some old, some invented just to fill the silence. The rat has a favourite. You know this because it curls tighter each time you tell it. One morning, something strange happens. The chapel bell rings. It's not Sunday, it's not a holiday, and as far as you know, no one's died recently. You pull on your boots still damp, always damp, and follow the sound. The village has gathered, all in cloaks and scarves and the kind of suspicious optimism people only have when someone might be giving away food. At the chapel steps stands the priest, holding up a scrap of parchment. A messenger came last night, he says, with word from the city. That gets murmurs. The city is more rumour than place to most of you. It's where laws come from, and taxes. Also where shoes go to die. There's a fair. The priest continues 10 days from now, midwinter. They're calling for storytellers, musicians, and anyone with craft to trade. You blink, because you've been trading stories, and now there's a fair. It feels like a sign, or a coincidence dressed in festival colours. Historians still argue whether medieval fairs were moments of relief or cleverly disguised tax traps. Probably both. Still, they were different. And in winter, different is better than gold. You return home with your thoughts whirling like snowflakes that refuse to land. Could you go? Could you tell a tale that isn't just for yourself and the rat? You open the cupboard. There's enough food to last. Just barely. You check your boots. Passable. You lift the glass comb. Hold it in the light. It gleams like bottled moonlight. Maybe that's what you trade. A story and a comb. You tell the rat. It's unimpressed, but it doesn't leave, which is encouragement in its own way. That evening, you prepare. You practice your tales. You comb your hair once, carefully. The comb catches, then glides. You imagine people listening, laughing at your jokes, noticing your metaphors. You laugh out loud at that thought, just to hear it. Then, a knock, not like the storyteller's knock. Not gentle, urgent. You open the door to find Marjorie's eldest, panting, eyes wide. Come quick, he gasps. Bert's fallen through the ice. You grab your cloak and follow. The fair can wait. For now, the village is calling. You run faster than you have all winter, the cold scraping your lungs like bark. The snow is heavier in the field near the stream, where old Bert has apparently taken his annual act of bravery too far. You find him surrounded by villagers, some shouting, some frozen with panic, all completely useless in terms of actual rescue. There he is, chest deep in a hole punched into the frozen stream, arms clinging to the edge like a determined turnip refusing to be pulled from the earth. You don't think, you move. Grabbing a rope from someone's cart, you loop it around yourself and belly crawl across the ice. Each creak is a warning. Each breath is a countdown. The cold slithers up through your elbows and into your teeth. Bert's lips are blue, his eyes flutter. He looks more annoyed than afraid. Didn't want to die on a chapel day. He mumbles, "You snort. Then maybe stay off the stream, you old goat," with 2 villagers anchoring the rope behind you and a very unhelpful goat bleating encouragement. You haul Bert out inch by inch. The ice groans, threatens, but holds. You collapse together on the bank, coughing and shivering, steam rising from your bodies like overcooked stew. Someone wraps a cloak around you both. Someone else produces something strong and sharp-smelling in a flask. You don't ask what it is. You just drink. Back at your cottage, you light the fire higher than ever and wrap Bert in all your blankets, which he accepts with grumbling gratitude. The rat investigates his boots but decides they're not edible. Wise choice. You make thin broth, heavy on onion, and even heavier on silence. Bert breaks it after the second sip. "Used to do this every winter," he says. "Test the ice. Let it know I'm still around." You raise an eyebrow, he shrugs. "Worked until it didn't." He coughs, winces, sips more. You hear about the fairy, asks. You nod. "Gonna go." You shrug. He watches you over the rim of the cup. You should. You tell good stories, better than most sermons. You're not sure if that's a compliment or a condemnation. You thank him anyway, later, when he's asleep in your bed and the rat has resigned itself to sharing floor space. You sit by the hearth and stare into the flame, not for warmth, for answers, and, as often happens in moments like this, someone knocks, not the door, at the window. You jump, pull the curtain back. It's the figure, the cloaked one, standing in the snow, waiting. You meet them at the door. They hand you something wrapped in thick parchment. Then they're gone. No words, just breath and frost and shadow. You unwrap it. Inside a small vial of something dark red. You sniff. Not wine, not blood, ink, and a carved stylus. On the parchment, one word burned into the corner right. Historians still argue whether peasants wrote at all or simply memorized everything, but you don't care. Tonight, you begin. Not just to tell, to write. Your first sentence is shaky. Your second is better. By the 10th, the words come smoother than the ice ever did. You wake to a different sort of stillness, the kind that follows a storm. The snow is undisturbed, untrampled. Your breath comes out in slow plumes as you sit up, blanket slipping from your shoulders like a forgotten thought. Bert is gone. Not gone his boots and smell linger, but he's left quietly, with a note carved into a split bit of wood. Didn't want to crowd your legend. You chuckle, then wince. Your ribs are sore from crawling on the ice. Still, it's time. You sit at the table, unwrap the stylus, and dip it into the ink. The vial is small, but deep. Deeper than it looks. You wonder what it's made of. Berries rust magic. Probably not magic. Still, the parchment is soft under your hand. Not fine, not noble, but real. And once again, you write. Not just memories, plans. You sketch a map of your journey to the fair through the forest path. Over the frozen stream, not on it. You note, past the chapel and the ruins of the old mill. You write the names of the stories you'll tell, or at least pretend to tell. The wolf woman, the fossil shell, the snowflake child. You pause, then write one more. The listener in the woods, because somehow you know the cloaked figure will be there. Maybe not in person, maybe not in form, but their presence hums beneath your words like a second voice. Outside, the light softens. The snow picks up again, slow flakes that drift rather than fall, like feathers trying not to be noticed. You pack carefully, a pouch of dried root, the last fig, the fossil shell wrapped in cloth, the glass comb, the stylus and the parchment tied together with the red thread you save from the first parcel. You leave the rat a small pile of crumbs and a whispered promise to return. You don't know if it understands, but it blinks in a way that feels binding. The village is gathered at the edge of the woods when you arrive. Others are going, 2 craftspeople, jugglers. One man who claims his goose can recite psalms. You suspect the goose just honks rhythmically. You walk together. A strange little caravan of hopes and wool. You pass the storyteller's log. No lavender today, no footprints, but still you glance at it and nod. It's cold, and your boots leak, and someone is definitely singing the wrong lyrics to a hymn, but you don't care, because with each step the air feels lighter, not warmer, just possible. Historians still argue whether these midwinter fairs truly helped rural folk, or merely reminded them of everything they lacked. You can't speak for everyone. But for you, this is the warmest you've felt all season. And as the trees part and the faint sound of music creeps over the snow, you realise you're not just walking toward a fair, you're walking into your story. The fair emerges slowly, like a dream pressed between layers of fog and candle smoke. Colourful banners sway in the breeze, though they've been dulled by frost and patched by hand. Stalls line the muddy road, each one smelling like something you forgot you loved: roasting nuts, spiced cider, tallow candles, hay-soaked wool. People are everywhere, laughing, trading, shivering. You and the rest of your caravan blend in like melted snow into soup, just more texture in a bowl already full. You don't announce yourself, you just watch, absorb. There's a small platform near the centre, half crumbled and mostly ignored. A carved wooden sign hangs overhead, barely legible: Tales for Trade. You sign your name on the list first with hesitation, then a flare of defiance. You don't write it with ink. You carve it into the wood with your stylus. A bit dramatic. Yes, but no one stops you. As night begins to fall, people gather near the fire pits. The cold has teeth again, and laughter rises as a defence. You clutch your pouch close, not from fear, from weight. There's meaning inside it now. A shell, a comb, a dream. When your name is called, you step onto the platform with breath you didn't know you'd been holding. The crowd isn't huge, but they're listening, and you begin. You don't read, you don't recite, you unfold. The story of winter's silence, of a rat who judges stories like a monk with wine, of a fossil found in a forest and a comb that glowed like sea glass, of voices that don't speak but guide, and of you, just you. The words flow slowly, like honey stubborn in a cold jar, but they land. People laugh, people sigh. One child stares at you like you're the only lantern in the fog, and when you finish, there's a moment of nothing. Not quiet, just fullness, then applause, soft, sparse, but real. A woman presses a coin into your palm. Not for the story, she says, for the feeling. You nod. Later, someone offers to trade a pair of boots for your comb. You decline. Another asks if you're travelling further. You shrug. Maybe. You sleep that night under the stars, wrapped in borrowed wool and the afterglow of having been yeared. And as your eyes close, the sounds of the fair fading into dream muffled echoes. You remember the last thing the cloaked figure ever handed you, the word write, and for once, you know what it means, because you are writing, not with parchment, with your days, and each one, even the worst, is a line in a story someone will whisper one night to keep the cold away. And now, as the fair fades into fog and the last ember of the fire nestles into ash, you lie back in your borrowed blanket and let the hush of winter settle over your chest like a second skin. The sky is heavy with stars, dimmed slightly by chimney smoke and the drifting steam of hot cider, but they still glint like frozen candlelight hung far too high to reach. You shift, just enough to feel the coin in your pocket, the stylus still wrapped in its ribbon, the comb tucked against your heart. They're not treasures, not really. They're anchors, little weights that remind you this season, these days, this you they happened, you are here. Your eyes drift closed. In the hush, someone nearby hums an old tune, one you don't recognize, but somehow know. Your breath matches it, slows, deepens. The fair becomes a blur behind your eyelids, the snow a memory your toes barely recall. The cold, it's gentled now, padded by wool and good stories and the quiet relief of having nothing left to prove tonight. Somewhere, maybe just in your mind, the cloaked figure is watching, not with judgment, just with curiosity. Maybe they've always been there. Maybe they're part of you. You smile, just slightly, and as your breath softens, and the last voices from the fair become muffled and far away, you let the weight of winter roll off your shoulders and into the frostbitten ground. There's no rush, no ending to fear, only the slow drift into rest, where even history snores and ink dries quietly beside the fire. Good night.